Hello everyone, and a quiet welcome back to Boring History for Sleep, your calm harbour for a tranquil journey through the annals of history. As you settle into your cosy bed or your favourite armchair, and we get ready to dive into tonight's trip into the medieval world, I invite you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're tuning in from, and what time of day it is for you. It's always a wonderful reminder of how vast and connected our community of quiet history enthusiasts truly is. If these deep, tranquil dives into the past help you find rest, do consider subscribing to join our little community of history lovers seeking a restful night's sleep. Tonight, we embark on a journey back to the age of the Crusades, but we won't be following knights in their polished steel or kings in their silken tents. No, our path follows a more trodden, more desperate trail. We'll walk in the worn-out leather shoes of the common soldier, the forgotten man whose back bore the true weight of the cross. We are here to understand the profound and unrelenting misery of his existence, and to explore in quiet detail just why life sucked for a common soldier during the Crusades. The story of your suffering begins not on a dusty battlefield in the Levant, but in the damp, familiar misery of your own village. You are not a knight, nor the son of a lord. You are Jean, or perhaps Gwenter, or William. Your name is as common as the mud that cakes your ankles for half the year. Your world is small, bounded by the Lord's forest on one side and the river on the other. Your life is a cycle of back-breaking labour, dictated by the sun and the seasons. You sow, you reap, you mend, you serve. The rewards are meagre: a bowl of thin porridge, a loaf of dark, gritty bread, and the right to continue living on land that will never be yours. This life is hard, but what gnaws at you more than the hunger in your belly is the fear in your soul. The priest, Father Thomas, speaks of it every Sunday, his voice echoing in the small, cold stone church. He speaks of hell. He doesn't just speak of it, he paints it for you in excruciating detail. He describes the eternal flames that lick at the flesh but never consume it, the cacophony of screams, the gnashing of teeth, the sulphurous air that chokes your ghostly lungs. He speaks of demons with tools forged in damnation, designed to inflict endless, unimaginable pain upon the souls of sinners. And, as he reminds you, everyone is a sinner. You have coveted your neighbour's slightly fatter pig. You have cursed the Lord under your breath. You have had impure thoughts. In the grim calculus of medieval theology, your soul is already heavily mortgaged to damnation. Then, one day, a new voice arrives. It might be a charismatic bishop, his robes finer than anything you've ever seen, or a wandering preacher, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. He brings news from a council, a place called Clermont. He brings words from the Pope himself, the Vicar of Christ on earth. He speaks of a land far to the east, a holy land where Christ walked, preached, and was crucified. And he tells you that this sacred ground is now defiled in the hands of the infidel. His sermon is a masterpiece of emotional and spiritual manipulation. He describes in lurid detail the alleged atrocities committed against Christian pilgrims. He speaks of desecrated churches, of holy altars overturned, of faithful men and women tortured and killed. These stories may be wildly exaggerated or entirely fabricated, but here, in your small isolated world, they are as real as the stone floor beneath your knees. You feel a righteous anger, a protective fury for a faith that is the very bedrock of your existence. But it is not just a call to arms. It is a promise. It is an opportunity you could never have dreamed of. The preacher announces the Pope's decree. Anyone who takes up the cross and journeys to liberate the Holy Land will be granted a plenary indulgence. All of their sins, every single one, will be wiped clean. The slate will be fresh. It is a get-out-of-hell-free card. The years of agonizing purgatory, the eons of torment, described by Father Thomas all of it, gone. For a man like you, whose every waking moment is a struggle, and whose every sinful thought is a step closer to eternal fire, this is a miracle. It is a direct line to heaven, offered not to a king or a saint, but to you. The propaganda doesn't stop at your soul, it speaks to your empty stomach and your bleak future. The East, the preacher claims, is a land flowing with milk and honey. He paints visions of unimaginable wealth, of cities with walls of silver and rivers of gold. The land you inhabit, he might quote, is too narrow for your large population. It does not abound in wealth, and it furnishes scarcely food for its cultivators. Hence it is that you murder and devour one another, that you wage war, and that many among you perish in civil strife. He offers an escape from feudal obligation, from debt, from the grinding poverty that has been your family's lot for generations. For the duration of your holy quest, your land is protected by the church, your debts are frozen, it's a reset button on your entire miserable life. You look around the church, you see the faces of your neighbours, you see the same desperate hope reflected in their eyes. Your friend who lost his harvest to blight, the man whose son died of a fever last winter, the landless second and third sons with no inheritance and no prospects. The social pressure is immense. To take the cross is to be a hero, a crucis signatus, one signed by the cross. A rough cross of cloth is sewn onto your tunic, a public declaration of your piety and courage. To refuse the call is to be branded a coward, perhaps even a poor Christian. In this moment, fueled by a potent cocktail of genuine faith, abject fear, social ambition, and calculated propaganda, the decision feels less like a choice and more like a destiny. You step forward, your heart pounding with a mixture of terror and elation, and you take the cross. You have just enlisted in God's army. You have also just sealed your fate, embarking on a journey where the promise of heaven will be paid for with an earthly hell you cannot yet begin to imagine. The initial departure from your village was a blur of clumsy farewells and a strange, hollow excitement. For the first time in your life, you walked away from the fields and huts you knew, not for a day's journey to the market, but forever. You are part of a great, shambling river of humanity, a chaotic procession flowing east. In the beginning, there is a sense of shared purpose, even camaraderie. You sing hymns as you walk, the sound thin and reedy in the open air. You share your crust of bread with a man from a neighbouring village. The cross on your tunic feels like a shield, a mark of divine favour. Jerusalem, you believe, is a destination that can be reached, a glorious end to a righteous journey. This illusion does not last long. The first week is a novelty. The second week, your feet begin to ache. By the end of the first month, the reality of the march has settled in, a heavy, suffocating blanket of misery. The scale of the journey is something your mind cannot truly grasp. You were told it was far, but far, to you, meant a 3-day walk. Now, you learn of lands and kingdoms you've never heard of, each one a vast, seemingly endless expanse to be crossed on foot. The initial column of thousands, once a source of strength, becomes a logistical nightmare. It is a slow-moving plague, consuming the resources of every town and village it passes. Your most intimate and relentless tormentor is the road itself, and what it does to your feet. The sturdy leather shoes you started with, perhaps the only pair you owned, are the first casualty. The constant friction, the unforgiving ground, the dampness from morning dew and sudden downpours, all conspire against them. The leather cracks, the seams give way. Soon, you are walking on thinning soles that offer little protection from sharp stones and thorns. You try to repair them with scraps of twine, but it's a losing battle. Eventually, you join the growing ranks of those who wrap their feet in rags. These rags become sodden with mud and sweat, rubbing your skin raw. Blisters form, burst, and become open, weeping sores. Every single step is a carefully negotiated act of pain. You learn to walk in a specific way to avoid putting pressure on the worst of the sores, a limping, shuffling gait that becomes the universal language of the common foot soldier. Infection is a constant, silent threat. A small cut, ignored, can swell, the flesh around it turning an angry red, the pain becoming a hot, throbbing pulse that travels up your leg. You see men sit by the side of the road, unable to take another step, their feet swollen to twice their normal size. You know they will be left behind. And then there is the weight. You are not a knight with a squire to carry his burdens. Everything you have is on your own back. It is not much, but it is heavy. A rough-spun blanket, a wooden bowl, a knife, perhaps a water skin that is usually half empty and tastes of stale leather. If you were fortunate, you were given some form of weapona, rusty spearhead on a wooden shaft, or a simple axe. Its weight on your shoulder is a constant, chafing reminder of a purpose that feels increasingly remote. The straps of your sack dig into your shoulders, creating their own set of sores. Your back aches with a deep, persistent pain that never truly leaves you, even in the brief, fitful moments of sleep. The world you travel through is an antagonist. In the forests of Germany, it is the endless, claustrophobic trees and the chilling rain that soaks you to the bone. In the Alps, it is the thin, cold air that makes your lungs burn and the treacherous paths where a single misstep means a fall into oblivion. Later, as you push into the Byzantine lands and beyond, it will be the sooner, relentless, punishing force you are completely unaccustomed to. It beats down on your head and neck, cracking your lips and baking the very ground you walk upon. You have no map. You have no real understanding of geography. Your world shrinks to the dusty heels of the man in front of you and the commands of leaders who are themselves often just as lost. The march grinds on, a monstrous, unthinking beast. The hymns have long since died out, replaced by a symphony of suffering, the wet, hacking coughs of the sick, the low moans of the injured, and the rhythmic, shuffling scrape of thousands of ruined feet, dragging themselves one step closer to a destination that feels less like a holy city and more like a fever dream. The promise of salvation in the next life has been completely overshadowed by the simple, desperate need to survive the next mile. The food you carried from home is a distant, almost dreamlike memory. That small, precious sack of hard-baked rye bread, the wedge of cheese wrapped carefully in cloth, the strip of salted pork was all consumed weeks, or is it months, ago. You can no longer be sure. Time, like the landscape, has blurred into a monotonous smear of hardship. The promises made by the preachers and lords, of well-stocked supply depots and a land of plenty, have proven to be hollow words carried on the wind. The army, this great, lumbering beast, has a hunger that is bottomless, and there is nothing to feed it. You learn a new term, a word that becomes central to your existence: foraging. In the beginning, it sounds almost noble, a military necessity. Your leaders tell you that you are gathering sustenance from the land, taking provisions from those who are uncooperative or hostile to God's mission. You and a small group are sent out from the main column, branching off into the countryside. You approach a small village that looks hauntingly like the one you left behind. You see the same thatched roofs, the same muddy tracks. You see the frightened eyes of a peasant woman, clutching her child, and in them you see your own wife, your own sister. But the gnawing in your gut is a more powerful master than memory or empathy. You take their chickens. You empty their meagre grain store. You ignore their pleas, spoken in a language you don't understand, but whose meaning is universal. You tell yourself it is for God. You tell yourself it is necessary. But this thin veneer of justification quickly peels away. As the army swells with more and more desperate people, not just soldiers, but pilgrims, women, and children who followed the call foraging, devolves into simple, brutal plunder. Discipline, already fragile, shatters completely. The distinction between a hostile local and a fellow Christian in the lands of Hungary or the Byzantine Empire becomes meaningless. A farm is a farm. Food is food. The armed groups become little more than roving bands of desperate bandits. Fights break out over a single loaf of bread. A man can be knifed in the dark for the half-eaten apple in his sack. You learn to guard what little you have, with a ferocity that borders on paranoia. You learn to see every other man not as a brother in arms, but as a rival for survival. And then the true hunger begins. This is not the familiar pang of missing a meal. This is a deep, cellular craving, a constant, agonizing ache that hollows you out from the inside. It is the first thing you feel when you wake in the cold, damp morning, and the last thing you are aware of as you fall into a restless, dream-plagued sleep. Your body begins to betray you. Your muscles, once strong from a life of labour, turn soft and weak. Walking becomes a monumental effort. Your vision sometimes swims, the world going grey at the edges. You become obsessed with the idea of food. You fantasize about the simplest things: a hot stew, a piece of fruit, the heel of a loaf of bread. Your conversations with your comrades, when you have the energy to speak at all, revolve around food. Food you once ate, food you hope to find. You start to eat things that you would not have once considered food for swine. You strip bark from trees and chew on the soft, bitter layer beneath. You dig in the dirt for roots, your fingers raw, hoping for anything that isn't poisonous. You learn to identify certain grasses that can be boiled into a thin, foul-tasting gruel that does little more than warm your stomach for a few minutes. When a horse, exhausted and starved itself, finally collapses, a riot ensues. Men fall upon the carcass with knives, tearing at the stringy, tough meat, fighting over entrails. You learn to boil your leather belt or the straps of your shield for hours, hoping to render them into a gelatinous, barely digestible slime. The final, horrifying threshold is crossed during a siege, or when the army is hopelessly lost and stranded. You see men, their eyes sunken and wild, looking at the bodies of the fallen, not with sorrow, but with a terrifying, calculating gaze. At first, it is whispered about. Then, it happens. The great taboo is broken. At the siege of Ma'arat al-Numan, the chronicles will later state plainly, "Our troops boiled pagan adults in cooking pots. They impaled children on spits and devoured them grilled. You try to avert your eyes, but you cannot escape the smell or the sight of men you once knew reduced to the most primal state." Perhaps, in a moment of ultimate desperation, when the hunger has erased every last vestige of the man you were, you partake. You chew. You swallow. You do not think. The act itself is a kind of death, the death of your soul, a damnation more immediate and tangible than any hell the priests ever described. The crusade, for you, is no longer about liberating a holy city. It is a desperate, daily war against the all-consuming void in your own stomach. You were told you were joining a unified Christian army, a single body united under the banner of the cross. The reality you find yourself in is a fractured, chaotic, and dangerously divided mob. The very concept of the Crusader army is a fiction. Instead, you are part of a sprawling, multilingual encampment of mutual suspicion, led by arrogant nobles who despise each other as much as, if not more than, they despise the enemy. Your first and most constant reminder of this division is the barrier of language. You are a Frenchman speaking your regional dialect of Languedoc. The man sleeping next to you is a German from the Rhineland, whose guttural tongue is completely incomprehensible. Across the fire, a group of Normans from southern Italy are laughing, their speech a strange mix of French and something else. There are Lombards, Provençals, Lotharingians. You communicate through crude hand gestures and a shared vocabulary of maybe a dozen essential words: water, bread, enemy, march. This isn't just an inconvenience, It's a source of constant friction and paranoia. You can't understand their jokes, their complaints, or their orders. Is that group of Germans laughing at you? Are those Lombards plotting to steal your meagre rations? Without the bond of shared language, trust is impossible. Small misunderstandings can escalate into brawls with frightening speed, fought with fists, knives, and whatever makeshift clubs are at hand. The camp at night is not a place of rest, but a tense landscape of segregated, resentful cliques. The deepest and most bitter division, however, is the chasm between you, a common foot soldier, and the nobility. You watch the knights on their magnificent war horses, clad in chainmail that glints in the sun. They have tents to shelter them from the rain, while you sleep in the open mud. They have squires and servants to tend to their needs, polish their armour, and cook their food that is often plentiful while you are starving. You see them feasting on roasted fowl, drinking wine from silver cups, their laughter echoing through the camp as you chew on boiled leather. This isn't just inequality. It feels like a profound betrayal of the shared mission. Weren't you all soldiers of Christ? Did your piety count for less because you couldn't afford a horse? Their arrogance is a daily humiliation. They ride through the marching column, their horses kicking up dust and mud onto the infantry, never giving you a second glance unless it's to bark an order or an insult. To them, you are not an individual, you are an expendable tool, a piece of infantry chaff to be thrown at a wall or used to fill a ditch. They refer to the common folk in the army as the pauperes Christi, the poor of Christ, a term that is both patronising and dismissive. They hold their own councils of war, making decisions that will determine whether you live or die, without any regard for your opinion or your welfare. Their personal rivalries and ambitions dictate the army's strategy. Duke Godfrey of Bouillon might refuse to cooperate with Count Raymond of Toulouse because of a dispute over a captured town or a point of honour. This means two massive contingents of the army will camp separately, refuse to share supplies, and sometimes even fail to support each other in battle, all because of the pride of two wealthy men. You are a pawn in their feudal games they have simply transported from the fields of France to the deserts of Syria. This internal conflict bleeds onto the battlefield. An order is given in French, and the German contingent misunderstands or ignores it. A charge is sounded, but only one Lord's Knights advance, leaving the infantry exposed and unsupported. You might find yourself caught in a pincer movement, not just from the enemy, but from the sheer incompetence and disunity of your own side. You see knights squabbling over who gets to claim a captured banner, while the enemy regroups for a counterattack. This chaos is terrifying. It robs you of any sense of security or strategy. You are not a cog in a well-oiled machine. You are a loose stone in an avalanche, tumbling towards an unknown fate, pushed and pulled by forces you cannot comprehend or control. The enemy in front of you is a clear and present danger, but the ally standing next to you might be just as deadly through his ignorance, his prejudice, or the fatal arrogance of the lord he follows. The Holy War has become a dozen smaller, pettier wars, all being fought simultaneously in the same chaotic, bloody space. After surviving the endless march and the internal strife, you finally arrive in what the preachers called the Holy Land. But the land you step into bears no resemblance to the paradise they described. It is not a place of milk and honey. It is an alien world, and it is actively trying to kill you. Your first enemy is the sun. This is not the mild, often hidden sun of Northern Europe. This is a relentless, white-hot orb that hangs in a vast, mercilessly blue sky. It beats down on the back of your neck, through your thin woolen tunic and coif. There is no escape from its oppressive heat. The very air feels heavy and hot in your lungs. The landscape shimmers with a heat haze that plays tricks on your eyes, making distant shapes dance and wobble. You feel a constant, dehydrating thirst that no amount of water seems to slake. The water skin you carry, if you can find water to fill it, becomes warm and unpalatable within an hour. You learn the early signs of heat stroke, a pounding headache, dizziness, a terrifying moment when you stop sweating because your body has no more moisture to give. You see strong men, veterans of a dozen brawls, simply collapse by the side of the road, their faces flushed, their breathing shallow. The land itself is hostile. You are used to green fields, deep forests, and abundant rivers. Here, you are confronted with a landscape of rock, sand, and thorny scrub. The ground is hard and unforgiving, littered with sharp stones that punish your already ruined feet. The dust is a constant torment. It gets into your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your food. It coats your skin, mixing with your sweat to form a gritty paste. You feel perpetually unclean, a deep, invasive filthiness that no amount of scrubbing in a dirty stream can wash away. With this new environment comes a new menagerie of life, and much of it is malevolent. You are plagued by insects you have never encountered before. Flies swarm around you in thick, buzzing clouds, drawn to your sweat, your sores, and any scrap of food you possess. They land on your lips and in your eyes. At night, you are feasted upon by mosquitoes that leave fiercely itching welts. More insidious are the creatures that hide in your clothes and blankets, fleas and lice, which you are already familiar with. But here they seem more numerous, more voracious. Scorpions, with their threatening, arched tails, scuttle out from under rocks. You learn to shake out your boots in the morning, terrified of what might have crawled inside during the night. You hear stories of snakes, some thick as a man's arm, and while you may not see one, the fear of them is always present. But the most lethal threat is not the sun or the scorpions. It is the invisible enemy, disease. Your body, accustomed to the pathogens of your European homeland, has no defense against the microbes of the Levant. The water is the primary culprit. You are so thirsty that you will drink from any source: a stagnant pool, a brackish well, a slow-moving river downstream from a camp of 10,000 men and their animals. The result is almost inevitable. You are struck down by dysentery, the bloody flux. It begins with agonizing stomach cramps that double you over in pain. Then comes the uncontrollable, watery diarrhea, soon streaked with blood. You become so weak you can barely stand. Dehydration, already a danger, becomes acute. Your skin loses its elasticity. Your eyes sink into their sockets. You are a living skeleton, fouling yourself and everything around you, an object of pity and disgust. This is just one of the many sicknesses that scythe through the camp. Typhoid fever, spread by contaminated food and water, brings a soaring fever, delirium, and a distinctive rash. Malaria, carried by the mosquitoes from the coastal marshes, racks your body with cycles of bone-shattering chills and burning fever. The camp is a perfect incubator for these diseases. Tens of thousands of malnourished, exhausted, and immunologically naive people are crammed together in unsanitary conditions. The sick lie next to the healthy. Human waste contaminates the water supply. The dead are often buried in shallow graves, if they are buried at all. An outbreak can sweep through the army with terrifying speed, killing far more soldiers than any battle. You walk through the camp and see the rows of men lying on the ground, groaning, shivering, or staring blankly into space, their bodies consumed by illnesses for which there is no name, no understanding, and no cure. This holy land feels profoundly cursed, a place where God seems to have turned his face away, leaving you to be baked, bitten, and broken by a world that wants you dead. The march, in all its grinding misery, is finally over. But you have not arrived at a destination of rest. You have simply exchanged a moving hell for a stationary one. Before you, rising from the dusty plains, are the walls of a city. Perhaps Antioch, perhaps Jerusalem. They are colossal, a sheer, arrogant statement of stone and defiance. And your army, this great exhausted serpent, has coiled itself around the city, settling into the dirt to begin the slow, agonizing process of a siege. The misery of the march was defined by motion. The misery of the siege is defined by a dreadful stillness. Your new home is a sprawling, chaotic city of its own, a city of rough tents, lean-tos, and shallow trenches, all simmering under the relentless sun. This is the hell, inside the walls of your own camp, a concentrated version of all the suffering you have already endured. The lack of sanitation, once a problem spread out over miles of road, is now a festering crisis. With tens of thousands of men and animals living in a fixed location for months, the ground becomes saturated with filth. Latrines are little more than overflowing pits, the stench of which becomes a permanent part of the air you breathe, a foul miasma that clings to your clothes and hair. Swarms of flies, thicker and more audacious than any you've seen before, move in a constant buzzing blanket between the latrine trenches, the offal pits where animals are butchered, and the meagre scraps of food you try to eat. Disease, which had been a constant companion on the road, now becomes a raging epidemic. The same water sources are used for drinking, washing, and waste disposal. Dysentery is no longer a risk, it is an inevitability. The camp becomes a vast, open-air hospital, but with no doctors and no cures. You see men wasting away, their bodies racked with fever, their groans a constant, low chorus that forms the soundtrack to your days and nights. The dead are so numerous that proper burials become a luxury. Bodies are often dumped in mass graves, shallowly dug, their presence a constant grim reminder of your own mortality. The hunger, too, takes on a new, more desperate character. The surrounding countryside is stripped bare within weeks. Every tree, every bush, every blade of edible grass is consumed. Your foraging parties must travel further and further, making them vulnerable to raids from the city's defenders or local forces. The army's supply lines, if they exist at all, are tenuous and often cut. You are perpetually hungry, a state that has become so normal it is almost unnoticeable, except for the weakness in your limbs and the lightheadedness that ambushes you when you stand up too quickly. Then comes the call to work, and you are thrust into the hell outside the walls. You are not a soldier as much as you are a labourer in the world's most dangerous construction project. You are sent in groups to fell trees to build the great siege engines. This is not simple logging. You work under the constant threat of attack, with enemy riders sweeping out from the city gates to harass and kill you. You then have to haul the massive timbers back to camp, your muscles screaming in protest, to be fashioned into monstrous contraptions. You see the siege towers rising, creaking wooden beasts plated with animal hides to protect them from fire. You see the catapults and trebuchets, their long arms promising to hurl death at the walls. You are the one who has to dig the sap's narrow, claustrophobic tunnels inching towards the base of the walls, where you work in darkness, the terrifying weight of the earth above you. Knowing a collapse means being buried alive. And then, the day of the assault comes. The fragile peace of the camp is shattered by the blare of horns. You are herded into formation, your heart a frantic drum against your ribs. Your role is not one of glorious combat. You might be part of a team pushing a massive siege tower across the uneven ground, a dozen men straining against its immense weight, while arrows, stones, and crossbow bolts rain down from the ramparts. The sound is deafening, the splintering of wood, the thud of projectiles, the screams of men hit. Your only protection is the tower itself, which could be set ablaze at any moment, turning it into your funeral pyre. Or you are given a ladder. This simple wooden tool is an instrument of almost certain death. You run with it towards the wall, a clumsy, heavy burden. As you place it against the stone, the world narrows to that single, terrifying vertical path. You begin to climb, the man above you blocking your view, the man below pushing you onward. You don't look up. To look up is to see what is coming for you. Massive stones that can crush your skull, pots of boiling oil or water, or, just as effectively, heated sand that pours down and finds its way into every gap in your armour and clothing, searing your skin. You feel the ladder shudder as the man above you is struck and falls, a dead weight crashing past you, perhaps knocking you from your own precarious hold. For every one man who makes it to the top, 10, 20, 50 fall. The base of the wall becomes a charnel house of broken bodies, twisted ladders, and dying men. The walls do not just keep the enemy in. They feel designed to mock your very existence, to prove the utter futility of your sacrifice in the most brutal, graphic way possible. The stories and songs you heard back home, the tales of chivalry sung in the Lord's Hall, they all lied. They spoke of glory, of noble knights in shining armour, clashing in elegant, almost balletic duels. They never told you about the noise, they never told you about the smell, and they never ever told you about the soul-crushing, bowel-loosening terror. The moments before the battle are a unique form of torture. You stand in a tightly packed formation, a skiltron or shield wall, shoulder to shoulder, with men you barely know. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and cheap wine that some have drunk for courage. You can feel the nervous tremors of the man next to you through the press of bodies. Your own heart is a frantic hammer against your ribs, so loud you are sure everyone can hear it. Your mouth is dry, your palms are slick with sweat inside your rough leather gloves. You grip your spear, the wood worn smooth and familiar, but today it feels alien and clumsy. Across the field you see them, the enemy. They are not the demonic caricatures the priests described. They are just men, like you, arranged in their own formations. But the sight of their massed ranks, the glint of sun on their spear points, the fluttering of their strange banisit creates a knot of pure cold dread in the pit of your stomach. Then comes the noise. It starts with the hornsiors and there's a cacophony of blaring, discordant notes designed to intimidate and signal the advance. It is followed by the shouting of commanders, words lost in the rising din. Then the drumming begins, a deep, rhythmic pulse that seems to vibrate through the very ground, a heartbeat for the coming slaughter. As you begin to march, a slow, shuffling advance, the noise swells. It is the rhythmic tramp of thousands of feet, the clank and jingle of metal, the creak of leather. Then the first volley of arrows is loosed. It is a sound like a sudden, violent tearing of fabric across the sky, a high-pitched hiss that ends with a sickening series of thuds and wet smacks as the arrows find flesh. Men around you cry out, a sharp, surprised yelp, or a deep, guttural groan, and fall. You flinch, hunching your shoulders, making yourself small, praying to a god who feels very far away. When the two lines finally crash into each other, the world dissolves into pure, sensory overload. The impact is a physical shockwave, a jarring collision of wood, iron, and flesh. The noise becomes an indescribable roar, a wall of sound composed of thousands of individual screams of pain and rage, the clash of sword on shield, the splintering of spear shafts, the wet, chopping sound of an axe biting into a limb. There is no room for elegant swordsmanship here. This is a shoving match, a desperate, close quarters struggle in a press of bodies. You stab forward with your spear into the crush, not even sure if you've hit the enemy or the man next to you. You use the butt of your spear, your shield, your fists, your teeth. The smell is overwhelming. It is the metallic, coppery tang of fresh blood, so thick in the air you can almost taste it. It is the sour stench of sweat and fear, the smell of voided bowels and bladders as men lose control in their final moments. It is the dust kicked up by the struggle, mingling with the blood to form a slick, treacherous mud underfoot. You slip on it, struggling for purchase on ground, made slick with the gore of your comrades. And then there is the terror. It is not a heroic emotion. It is a primal, animalistic instinct to survive that overrides everything else. You are no longer Jean, the peasant from Amiens. You are a cornered animal. Your vision narrows until you can only see the snarling, terrified face in front of you. Time warps. Moments stretch into eternity, and minutes disappear in a red blur. You see things you will never be able to unsee. You see a man's face cave in under a mace. You see an arm severed, the stump gushing a fountain of bright red blood. You see a friend you shared a meagre breakfast with this morning, now lying on the ground, his intestines spilled out like obscene, glistening ropes. There is no glory here. There is no chivalry. There is only the desperate, brutal, and horrifying business of killing, or being killed. You are not fighting for God or for Jerusalem anymore. You are fighting for the next breath, for the few inches of ground you stand on, driven by a fear so profound and absolute that it empties you of everything you once were. In the chaotic aftermath of battle, as the roar of combat fades to be replaced by the groans of the wounded, a new and more personal horror begins. To be wounded on a medieval battlefield is to be handed a ticket to a lottery, where nearly every outcome is a slow, agonizing death. The chivalric tales might end with the hero being carried from the field to be tended by a fair maiden, but your reality is a world of filth, pain, and profound medical ignorance. You are lying on the ground, the initial adrenaline of the fight draining away, leaving you cold and shaking. The pain, which was a dull, distant fact during the chaos, now comes roaring to the forefront of your consciousness. It is a sharp, searing fire in your leg, where a Saracen scimitar sliced through flesh and muscle. Or perhaps it's a deep, throbbing ache in your shoulder from a mace blow that shattered the bone. Your first challenge is simply to be found. The field is a carpet of bodies, both living and dead. The medics, if they can be called that, are not gentle saviours. They are often rough soldiers or barbers, assigned the grim task of triage, moving among the fallen, looking for those with a chance of survival. A wound to the gut, a deep head injury, these are death sentences. You might be given a sip of water and left to die. If your wound is deemed treatable, you are dragged or carried back to the camp. There is no sterile operating theatre. The hospital is a bloody, stinking tent, its floor covered in straw that is already soaked with the blood and grime of the men who came before you. Your surgeon is likely a barber surgeon, a man whose primary skills involve cutting hair and pulling teeth. He may be experienced, but his knowledge is based on tradition and brutal pragmatism, not on any understanding of infection or anatomy. His tools are laid out on a dirty cloth, saws, knives, probes, and cauterizing irons heating in a brazier. There is no anaesthetic, save for a leather strap to bite down on, and a large gulp of cheap, fiery wine if you are lucky. The pain of the treatment will be as bad, or worse, than the initial injury. If an arrow is lodged in you, the surgeon will probe the wound with his unwashed fingers or a metal tool, searching for the head. If it is a barbed arrowhead, he cannot simply pull it out. He may have to push it all the way through to the other side, or cut a much larger opening to extract it, tearing through more muscle and tissue. If your leg is shattered beyond repair, the only option is amputation. You are held down by several strong men as the surgeon takes his saw. The sound of the teeth grating against your own bone is a unique, stomach-churning horror that will echo in your memory forever if you survive. The pain is a white-hot, all-consuming agony that makes you scream until your throat is raw. There is no time for precision. The goal is to get the limb off as quickly as possible. The next step is to stop the bleeding. The preferred method is cauterization. The surgeon takes a red-hot iron from the fire and presses it against your raw stump or open wound. The sizzle of your own flesh cooking, the acrid smell, and a new wave of pain so intense it threatens to shatter your mind is the price of survival. It is a brutal, desperate act that seals the blood vessels, but also destroys healthy tissue and creates a perfect, sterile for a moment, but ultimately vulnerable to infection surface of dead flesh. A less dramatic, but equally dubious method is to apply a poultice of cobwebs, dung, and bread mould, a foul-smelling concoction that is more likely to introduce new bacteria than to heal. And then comes the true killer: infection. In a world without germ theory, every wound is an open door for bacteria. The surgeon's hands are dirty, his tools are dirty, the water used to wash the wound is dirty, the dressings are dirty. Within a day or two, the edges of your wound begin to swell and turn a dark, angry red. A thick yellow-green pus, which some doctors mistakenly believe is a good sign of the body expelling bad humours, begins to ooze from the injury. A fever sets in. You drift in and out of consciousness, your body racked with chills and sweats. The pain becomes a constant, throbbing presence. You may develop gangrene, the flesh turning black and putrid, the foul smell of decay emanating from your own living body. There is nothing anyone can do. You have survived the chaos of the battlefield only to die slowly, in excruciating pain, from a microscopic enemy you cannot see or comprehend, surrounded by the stench of your own rotting flesh. You came on this journey to save your soul. That was the promise, the luminous bargain offered in that cold stone church so long ago. You would fight for Christ, and in return, the slate of your life, with all its petty sins and secret shames, would be wiped clean. The cross you sewed onto your tunic was a sacred symbol of this pact, a constant reminder of your holy purpose. But now, after months or years of this waking nightmare, you sometimes catch your reflection in a puddle of murky water, and you do not recognize the man who stares back. The symbol on your chest feels less like a badge of honor and more like a cruel joke, a brand of hypocrisy. The erosion of your faith did not happen in a single dramatic moment. It was a slow, creeping rot, a death by 1,000 cuts. It began with the foraging when you first robbed a fellow Christian family in the Balkans, their terror-filled eyes mirroring the ones you left at home. You told yourself it was necessary, a small sin for a greater good. It continued in the squabbling, divided camp, as you watched your noble leaders in Christ hoard food, bicker over plunder, and sacrifice your life for their own vanity. You began to wonder if God truly favoured these arrogant, selfish men. The real crisis, the moment the foundations of your soul truly cracked, came with the first massacre. It might have been a smaller town, or it might have been the great, holy city itself. When the walls were finally breached, a madness descended upon the army. It was not a strategic military takeover. It was a frenzied, blood-drunk rampage. The orders were simple and absolute. Kill them all. And you obeyed. You, who once worried about the state of your soul for coveting a pig, now found yourself part of a human wave of destruction sweeping through narrow streets. You kicked in the door of a home. You saw the faces of a family, huddled in a corner, their expressions a mask of pure, uncomprehending terror. They were not soldiers. They were old men, women, children. In that moment, the priest's sermons about infidels and pagans dissolved into meaningless noise. These were just people. But the man next to you swung his axe, and you swung yours, because to hesitate, to show mercy, was to mark yourself as a weak link, a potential liability. The act itself was a blur of frantic, clumsy violence, driven by a mixture of terror, rage, and a terrifying, intoxicating sense of power. Later, in the dreadful quiet that follows such slaughter, you walked through the city. The scale of what you had done, what you had been a part of, settled upon you like a physical weight. The streets were slick with blood, making the cobblestones treacherous. Bodies were piled in the alleyways like discarded refuse. You saw the small, still forms of children lying next to their mothers. You saw holy places, mosques, and synagogues, filled not with prayer but with corpses, their sacred texts trampled into the gore on the floor. That night, you tried to pray. You knelt, closed your eyes, and tried to form the familiar words of the Paternoster. But they felt like ash in your mouth. What God could possibly want this? How could this orgy of violence be considered a holy act? The promise of salvation felt like a monstrous deception. You had been told you were cleansers, purifiers. But as you looked at the blood dried under your fingernails, you felt utterly, irredeemably stained. You hadn't just killed bodies, you felt as though you had murdered souls, including your own. This spiritual crisis creates a vacuum, and something must fill it. For you and many others, what rushes in is a hard, cold cynicism. The Grand Crusade is a lie. The noble cause is a sham. God is either absent or he is a monster. All that is left is the grim reality of survival. Your morality recalibrates. Good is what keeps you alive until tomorrow. Bad is what gets you killed. Empathy becomes a dangerous luxury. Comradeship is reduced to a temporary, pragmatic alliance. You become hard, hollowed out. The horrors that once shocked, you now barely register. Another dead body, another act of cruelty, it is just the backdrop of your daily existence. You have committed and witnessed acts so far beyond the pale of your old life that you can no longer connect with the man you once were. He is a stranger to you. You came seeking remission for your sins, but you have committed sins so profound they eclipse anything you could have imagined before. The weight of it all doesn't crush you. It simply replaces what used to be your soul. The promise of wealth was the earthly twin to the promise of salvation. The preachers had painted the East as a treasure chest, waiting to be pried open. They spoke of silks, spices, gold, and jewels riches beyond the wildest dreams of a man whose entire net worth might have been a single pig and a change of clothes. This dream of plunder was a powerful motivator, a tangible reward for the hell you were enduring. You imagined returning to your village not as the serf who left, but as a wealthy man, able to buy land, build a fine house, and command respect. Every grueling step of the march, every night spent shivering in the mud, was made bearable by this glittering fantasy. The reality, like every other promise, turns out to be a bitter disappointment. The first time you are part of a successful sack of a town or castle, a frantic, desperate hope surges through you. This is it. This is the moment of reward. Amidst the chaos and killing, you join the frenzied search for loot. You are not looking for grand treasures. Your ambitions are more modest. A silver cup, a handful of unfamiliar coins, a bolt of fine cloth. You break into a merchant's house. The place has already been ransacked. Chests are splintered open, their contents strewn across the floor. You sift through the debris, your heart pounding. But you are too late. The knights and their retinues were here first. It is an unwritten, yet brutally enforced rule of the Crusade. The leaders get first pick. While you were fighting in the streets or scaling the walls, their men-at-arms were securing the wealthiest quarters, the palaces, the treasuries. They have the organisation, the authority, and the brute force to claim everything of real value. You find a small, ornate box. For a moment, your breath catches. You pry it open, your fingers trembling. It is empty. Someone has already taken the contents. You continue your desperate search, finally finding a small pouch of copper coins under a broken bed. It's more money than you've held at one time in your entire life, but you know instinctively that it is a pittance. In another room, you find a silk shawl. It is beautiful, softer than anything you have ever touched. You stuff it into your tunic, a small secret treasure. But even this minor success is fraught with peril. As you emerge back into the street, clutching your meagre findings, you are instantly a target. The army has become a society of predators. A larger, stronger soldier, perhaps with a couple of his friends, sees the bulge in your tunic. He confronts you. You have a choice: surrender your pathetic loot, or fight for it and risk a knife in the ribs. There is no law here but the law of the strongest. You hand over the shawl, the beautiful silk a final, mocking reminder of the wealth you will never possess. Even if you manage to hold on to some small items, their value is fleeting. What good is a silver cup when you have no clean water to drink from it? How do you spend foreign coins in a military camp where the only thing to buy is a stale piece of bread at an extortionate price from a camp follower? The real currency here is food, water, and maybe a wineskin. You might trade a small, jewelled ring you found, something that could have secured your family's future back home, for a single, life-saving piece of salted meat. The wealth you dreamed of evaporates, bartered away for another day's survival. The ultimate futility is revealed when the great treasures of a captured city are finally tallied. You see the piles of gold, the chests of silver, the heaps of precious textiles being carted away under the heavy guard of a duke's or a count's men. You hear the leaders arguing over the division of the spoils, their disputes sometimes threatening to tear the entire army apart. This is the wealth that was promised. It is real, it exists. But it will never, ever be yours. You stand by, a silent, weary observer in your tattered clothes, your stomach empty, watching the riches you bled, for being divided amongst the very men whose incompetence and arrogance have cost the lives of so many of your comrades. The dream of plunder dies, not with a bang, but with a slow, grinding realization of your own powerlessness. You were the tool used to break open the treasure chest, and now that it is open, you are discarded. You have gained nothing but scars and a profound, bone-deep bitterness. You always thought you knew what dirty was. You grew up in a village of mud tracks and smoky huts, where animals often shared your living space. You were no stranger to the smell of manure, or the feeling of grime under your fingernails. But the squalor of the Crusader camp is a different order of existence, a descent into a level of filth so profound and all-encompassing that it redefines your understanding of misery. The camp is a temporary city, but with none of a city's infrastructure. It is a massive, organic entity that springs up, festers, and then moves on, leaving a poisoned landscape in its wake. When you are on the march, the problem is slightly dispersed, but during a long siege, it becomes a concentrated nightmare. The sheer density of life is the root of the problem. Tens of thousands of men, thousands of horses, mules, and oxen, all crammed into a few square miles. Every living creature consumes and excretes, and there is no system to manage the waste. The most immediate and overwhelming assault is on your sense of smell. The air itself is thick and foul, a complex tapestry of nauseating odours. The dominant note is the stench of human waste. There are no sewers. Latrines are simply deep trenches dug at the edge of the camp. Within days they are overflowing. The smell, a sharp and maniacal reek, blankets the entire encampment, especially when the wind is blowing in the wrong direction, though you soon realise there is no right direction. The ground around these pits becomes a treacherous, stinking swamp. In the heat of the day, the stench is unbearable. At night, it seems to seep into your blanket, your clothes, your very skin. Mingled with this is the smell of the animals. Their manure piles up, attracting swarms of flies. The acrid smell of horse urine soaks into the earth. Then there is the smell of decay. Animals die of starvation or disease, and their carcasses are often left to rot where they fall, or are dragged a short distance away to be picked apart by dogs and vultures. The smell of rotting flesh becomes a familiar, sickly sweet background scent. And, of course, there is the smell of unwashed human bodies. Bathing is a forgotten luxury. Water is too precious for washing. Everyone is caked in a layer of sweat, dust, and grime. The collective body odour of the army is a potent, sour miasma. This filth is not just an assault on your senses, it is a breeding ground for vermin and disease. Your constant companions are lice. They live in the seams of your tunic, in your hair, in your beard. You feel them crawling on your skin at night, their bites leaving small, intensely itchy red welts. You can spend hours picking them off, but it's a futile battle. They are everywhere, on everyone. Fleas are just as common, hopping from straw bedding to blankets to your skin. Their bite's another source of constant irritation. The squalor directly fuels the epidemics that ravage the camp. The flies that buzz between the latrine trenches and the butchery pits land on the piece of bread you are about to eat, depositing a microscopic cargo of death. The water source, a nearby river or a few wells, is inevitably contaminated. Upstream, men are watering their horses and washing their clothes. A few hundred yards away, the butchers are gutting animals, throwing the offal into the current. The water you cup in your hands to drink is a cloudy brown soup of pathogens. Living in this environment grinds down your spirit. You can never feel clean. You wake up filthy, you go to sleep filthy, the food you eat is filthy, the water you drink is filthy. The air you breathe is filthy. This constant, inescapable squalor is a physical manifestation of your own degradation. It mirrors the moral filth you have waded through, the spiritual decay you feel inside. It is a constant reminder that you have been stripped of your basic human dignity, reduced to living in conditions that would shame a pig. The promise of a holy city, a clean soul, a paradise in the next life, all feels like a distant, impossible dream when you are lying in your own filth, scratching at lice bites, and breathing the foul air of a man-made hell. In the beginning, you looked upon your leaders with a sense of awe. They were the great men of Christendom, dukes, counts, and princes whose names were spoken with reverence. Their banners, fluttering high above the marching column, were symbols of power and divine purpose. You believed you were following lions of the faith, men chosen by God to lead his army. You trusted them. This trust was a foundational pillar of your world, as essential as your belief in God or the strength of your spear shaft. The slow, painful erosion of that trust is perhaps the most profound betrayal of all. The betrayal isn't a single, dramatic act of treachery. It is 1,000 small cuts, a steady accumulation of evidence that you are not a soldier in God's army, but a pawn in a complex and utterly selfish game of power. It begins subtly. You notice that the army of Count Raymond and the army of Prince Bohemond camp on opposite sides of a valley. They do not share water sources. They do not coordinate foraging parties. You hear the whispers from the men-at-arms who are closer to the centres of power. The two great lords despise each other. They are rivals, and their personal feud, imported all the way from Europe, is more important to them than the unity of the Crusade. This isn't just gossip, it has deadly consequences. It means that when Bohemond's forces are skirmishing on the north side, Raymond's men may be ordered to stand down, leaving their fellow Christians to be slaughtered. A plea for reinforcement goes unanswered, not because of a tactical impossibility, but because of one man's pride. As the campaign drags on, you begin to see the true nature of their ambition. This is not a pilgrimage for them, it is a real estate venture. You hear that Baldwin has left the main army, taking his forces east to the city of Edessa. He hasn't gone to fight the enemy, but to install himself as the city's new ruler. He has carved out a kingdom for himself. The holy mission can wait. Later, after the brutal siege of Antioch, Bohemond does the same, claiming the great city as his own personal prize and refusing to march on to Jerusalem until his claim is secure. You are left sitting in the squalid camp, outside the walls, starving and dying of disease, while your leaders squabble over titles and territory. The Crusade has become their personal career path, and you are the expendable human capital they are spending to achieve their promotions. The most direct betrayal comes in the form of their utter disregard for your life. You are infantry. In the cold, hard calculus of medieval warfare, you are cheap and replaceable. A knight, with his expensive armour, his warhorse, and his years of training, is a valuable asset. You are not. This fact is demonstrated time and again. A lord, eager for glory, will order a premature assault on a section of a city wall he knows is heavily defended. He sends you and your comrades forward with ladders, a wave of poorly armed men, simply to test the defences and exhaust the enemy's supply of arrows and oil. He knows most of you will die. That is the point. You are a living battering ram, and your broken bodies are the price he is willing to pay to soften the target for his real soldiers, the knights who will follow. You are ordered into diversionary attacks designed to fail, drawing the enemy's attention while the main assault happens elsewhere. You are sacrificed knowingly, coldly, and pragmatically. Then there are the moments of baffling hypocrisy. You have been taught for months that every Muslim is an infidel, a mortal enemy of Christ. But then your leaders make a deal. They form an alliance with one local emir to fight against his rival. Suddenly, you are marching alongside the very men you were told were agents of the devil. The clean, simple lines of your holy war become a murky, confusing web of politics you cannot understand. It becomes clear that your leaders' goals are not spiritual, but purely political. They will make a deal with anyone, betray anyone, and change the definition of enemy at a moment's notice if it benefits them. This realization is a cold poison that seeps into your heart. The men you are dying for do not care if you live or die. They do not care about your soul. They do not even truly care about Jerusalem, except as a final, glittering prize to cap their own legends. Your suffering, your faith, your sacrifice, all just fuel for their ambition. The Saracen soldier, trying to kill you from across the battlefield, is an honest enemy. You can see him, and you can understand his purpose. The enemy within, the Lord on his great horse under his proud banner, is far more insidious. He is the one who stole your purpose and rendered your suffering meaningless. This betrayal leaves a wound far deeper than any sword could inflict. There are fates on the battlefield worse than a quick, clean death. You learn this in the chaotic, swirling aftermath of a rout. Your line broke. A horn sounded a retreat that dissolved into a panicked scramble, and in the confusion, you were separated. You may have been wounded, your legs screaming in protest as you tried to keep up. Or, perhaps, you were simply outrun, your lungs burning, your body finally giving out after years of abuse. The end comes not with a roar, but with a sudden, jarring stop. You are surrounded. Strange, bearded faces look down at you, their eyes holding not hatred, but a kind of weary professionalism. There is no glorious last stand. There is only the rough grasp of hands, the confiscation of your pathetic spear, and the incomprehensible commands of your captors. You are now a prisoner. The initial moments are a blur of humiliation and terror. You are stripped of what little you possess. Your knife, your worn leather belt, the tattered cross on your tunic which they rip off with a casual, almost indifferent gesture. You are property now, and your value is being assessed. You are bound, your wrists rubbed raw by coarse rope, and herded together with other unlucky souls into a miserable, shuffling column. The journey that follows is a horrifying parody of the march that brought you to this land. You are now the one being prodded along, thirsty and starving, at the mercy of guards who see you as little more than livestock. Your destination is a city, but you will not be entering it as a conqueror. You are led to a slave market. The heat, the noise, the smells of spices and unwashed humanity are overwhelming. Here, your degradation becomes a public spectacle. You are put onto a raised wooden block, stripped naked under the blazing sun. Your last shred of dignity is burned away by the hundreds of eyes that gaze upon you with cold, appraising looks. Potential buyers approach. They force your mouth open to inspect your teeth. They grab your arms and legs, pinching the flesh to gauge your muscle and health. They turn you around, prodding your back and limbs like a butcher assessing a cut of meat. You stand there, exposed and powerless, your humanity stripped away layer by layer. You are no longer Jean, the soldier of Christ. You are a commodity, Your worth measured in the silver coins that are exchanged between your old owner and your new one. The question of ransom may flicker in your mind, a tiny, desperate ember of hope. The great lords and knights, if captured, can expect to be ransomed. Their families have wealth, their lands have value. A complex system of diplomacy and finance exists for them. But for you, you are a nobody. Who would pay for your return? Your family are penniless serfs 1,000 miles away who probably assume you are long dead. The lord you nominally served barely knew your name and has already written you off as an acceptable loss. There will be no negotiations for your freedom. You are forgotten. That ember of hope dies, leaving only the cold ash of your new reality. Your fate now depends on the needs of the man who bought you. Perhaps you are destined for the galleys. You are chained to a wooden bench in the dark, stinking hold of a ship. Your world shrinks to the space of a few feet. Before you is the splintered, sweat-polished wood of the oar. Behind you is the back of another wretched man. Above you is the overseer with his whip. Your life becomes an endless, agonizing rhythm. Pull, release, pull, release. The whip cracks when the rhythm falters. You eat thin, rancid gruel where you sit. You sleep, when you are allowed to, slumped over your oar. The filth of dozens of men collects in the bilge water that sloshes around your ankles. You are chained to a floating hell, your muscles screaming, your body wasting away, until the day you collapse and are cut free to be thrown to the sharks. Or perhaps you are sold to work in a quarry. Your new life is spent under the same sun that once tormented you on the march, but now it is your master. From dawn until dusk, you swing a heavy sledgehammer, breaking rocks, or haul massive stone blocks, your back straining to the point of breaking. The dust fills your lungs, leading to a hacking cough that never leaves. The water is rationed, never enough to quench your thirst. Your skin is burned and blistered. You see men die of exhaustion, heat stroke, or from a careless accident. Their bodies are dragged away with little ceremony. You are a human tool, and when you break, you will be discarded and replaced. You might even be considered one of the lucky ones, sold to work on a farm or as a servant in a household. Here, the labour might be less lethal, but the spiritual death is just as complete. You are in a strange land, surrounded by a language you slowly begin to understand, a culture you are forced to adopt. The years blur together, the sharp edges of your memory begin to soften. The face of your wife becomes hazy. The name of your village feels like a word from a dream. Your faith, already shattered, is now irrelevant, a relic of a former life that no longer exists. You might survive for years, a ghost haunting someone else's world, the man you once were, completely erased, forgotten by everyone you ever knew, and eventually even by yourself. The war, for you, does not end with a declaration of peace or a triumphant parade. It simply stops. Perhaps the great city has been taken, and the lords who led you have secured their new domains and have no more use for a vast, hungry infantry. Or perhaps your contingent suffered such a catastrophic defeat that the army itself has dissolved, its survivors scattering like dust in the wind. One day you are a soldier, part of a whole, however dysfunctional. The next, you are simply a man, alone and abandoned, 1,000 miles from a home you can barely remember. The structure that has defined your life, the orders to follow, the formation to keep, the enemy to face is gone, and in its place is a terrifying empty freedom. You find yourself in a small, ragged group of other survivors. Misery is your only shared language. There is a Fleming with a permanently mangled hand, a Norman who speaks in fits and starts, his eyes haunted and vacant, and a German who is slowly wasting away from a persistent bloody cough. You are a brotherhood of broken men. Your shared goal is simple and monumental, to go home, but the path that brought you here is not the same path that can take you back. The land you marched through as a conquering force stripping it bare, now views you with open, murderous hostility. Every village you approach is a potential trap. The peasants whose grain you stole now see you not as a soldier of God, but as a starving, dangerous vagranter piece of the plague that once swept over them, now crawling back. The journey begins. It is a reverse pilgrimage, a descent from one hell into another. The physical act of walking, once a torment, is now a more profound form of agony. Your body is a wreck. The leg that was wounded years ago has healed into a knot of scarred tissue that sends a jolt of pain up your spine with every step. The fever you contracted in the swamps outside Antioch returns periodically, leaving you shivering and weak for days, reliant on the thin charity of your companions not to leave you behind. You are all malnourished, gaunt figures with sunken eyes and skin stretched tight over your bones. Foraging is no longer an option. You are not an army, you are beggars. You learn the profound humiliation of holding out a hand for a crust of bread, of being cursed at, of having dogs set upon you. You sleep in ditches, in the ruins of abandoned buildings, huddled together for warmth against a cold you seem to feel in your very marrow. Your small group, which once felt like a form of security, becomes a source of friction. The last piece of stale bread must be divided. The water skin is never full enough. Paranoia, the old companion from the camp, returns. You sleep with one eye open, guarding the only thing you have left, your own miserable life. Eventually, you reach a port city on the coast. The sight of the sea, a great glittering expanse of blue, offers a flicker of hope. A ship can take you across the water, bypassing hundreds of miles of hostile territory. But the port is a microcosm of the entire Crusades' brutal hierarchy. You see knights and wealthy merchants calmly negotiating passage for themselves and their retinues, their baggage chests filled with the plunder you never touched. You and your wretched band approach a ship's captain. He looks at you with contempt. He sees your rags, your sickness, your desperation. He quotes a price that is so laughably beyond your means it feels like a physical blow. You have nothing to offer. Your only currency is your body. After days of begging, you find a captain willing to take you, not as a passenger, but as cargo. The price of passage is to work, or simply to exist, in the ship's hold. You descend into a dark, suffocating space below the deck. It is crammed with other destitute pilgrims, human ballast in the belly of the ship. The air is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, seasickness, and the ever-present stench of the bilge. You are packed so tightly you can barely move. When a storm hits, the ship becomes a torture chamber. You are thrown back and forth in the darkness, the groaning of the ship's timbers mingling with the cries and prayers of the terrified people around you. After weeks that feel like a lifetime, you are unceremoniously dumped on a shore in Italy or southern France. You are home, or rather, you are on the same continent as your home, but you are still hundreds of miles away, a foreigner in a Christian land. You don't speak the language. You are still a beggar, a vagrant. The final leg of the journey is the loneliest of all. Your small band has likely broken apart, each man heading in his own direction. You walk alone now, a solitary, limping figure on a road that feels just as endless as the one in Anatolia. The faces you see are no longer hostile, but they are indifferent, which is its own kind of pain. As you finally limp over a hill and see the familiar shape of the woods and the spire of the church you left behind, you feel no elation. You feel nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness. The impossible journey is over, but you are not the same man who left, and you have a chilling, certain premonition that the home you have suffered so much to reach will never truly be home again. You stand on the edge of the village, a ghost returned from a forgotten war. The place is both achingly familiar and jarringly strange. The same stream gurgles by the side of the road. The same smoke curls from the same thatched roofs. But the children playing in the dirt have faces you don't recognize. The adults who pass you on the path give you a wide berth, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. They see a stranger, a gaunt man with a frightening intensity in his eyes, his skin burned dark by a foreign sun, his body held together by scars. His clothes are rags, and he walks with a permanent limp, his gait a testament to a broken and badly healed bone. Your family, if they are still alive, greet you with a joy that is quickly tempered by shock and confusion. Your wife, who has aged a decade in the years you've been gone, stares at you as if seeing a spectre. Your children, who were small when you left, now see a father who is a terrifying, silent presence in their home. They were told you died a hero's death in the Holy Land. The reality of your return is far more complicated and uncomfortable than the simple narrative of martyrdom. You try to slip back into your old life, but it's like trying to put on a piece of clothing that is now several sizes too small. You go to the fields, but the familiar rhythm of sowing and reaping feels pointless and absurd. How can you care about the threat of blight on the wheat when you have seen entire cities put to the sword? The concerns of the villager dispute over a wandering cow, the price of salt at the market, the gossip about the baker's daughter are so trivial, so impossibly distant from the world of life and death stakes you inhabited for so long, that they feel like the chatter of a different species. You are with them, but not of them. A thick, unbreakable wall of experience separates you from everyone you once knew. They ask you for stories. The priest, the lord, the villagers, gathered around a fire. They want to hear about the Holy Land. They want tales of glory, of righteous battles against the infidel, of the shining walls of Jerusalem. They want the crusade from the songs and the sermons. You open your mouth to speak, but the words will not come. How can you describe the sound of a trebuchet stone smashing into a wall? How can you explain the smell of a plague-ridden camp, or the precise texture of bread made from boiled leather? How do you put into words the look in a man's eyes as you run him through with a spear, or the soul-hollowing emptiness after a massacre? The things you have seen, the things you have done, are unspeakable. To talk about them would be to unleash a horror into their simple world that they could not possibly comprehend. It would make them fear you, revile you, so you remain silent. You offer a few clipped, simple sentences. The fighting was hard, the sun was hot, Jerusalem is a great city. Your silence is mistaken for modesty, or perhaps for simple-mindedness. They cannot see the maelstrom of images that storm behind your eyes. You are haunted. At night, you do not find rest. Sleep is a battlefield. You are back in the press of bodies, the noise and the terror as real as it was years ago. You wake up shouting, your body drenched in a cold sweat, your wife looking at you with fear and pity. During the day, sudden noises, a blacksmith's hammer, a slamming door, a child's sudden shriek can send you into a state of high alert, your hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that is no longer there. You see the faces of the dead in the flickering firelight. The world is no longer a safe place. It is a landscape of hidden threats and traumatic reminders. The physical scars are the least of your worries. The limp, the missing fingers, the ugly purple wheal across your face, these are visible maps of your journey. The deeper wounds, the ones on your soul, are invisible and festering. You carry the weight of the men you killed, the atrocities you witnessed, the faith you lost. There is no one to talk to, no one who could possibly understand. You are profoundly, utterly alone, adrift in a sea of your own memories. You returned. You survived the march, the starvation, the disease, the battles, the captivity, and the impossible journey home. You won the brutal lottery of the Crusade. But as you sit by the fire in your own home, surrounded by your own family, you understand the final, cruelest irony of your ordeal. You never truly came home at all. A vital part of you died somewhere in the dust of Anatolia, or the bloody streets of Jerusalem, and this man who sits here now is merely its ghost, forever bound to a past that he can neither escape nor explain,